According to YouGov, 4% of adult men and 1% of adult women in the US think about the Roman Empire daily. We want to substantially increase those numbers, so we thought we'd take a little trip through time and reveal what caused the momentous rise and disastrous fall of one of history's most famous empires. Was it outside invaders, political corruption, crumbling infrastructure, or tax evasion? The answer may surprise you, although it likely includes a wide variety of factors. Our team of researchers dug through the ruins, read countless books, and conquered numerous territories in an attempt to replicate the events of and understand the inner workings of the Roman Empire. Before we really begin, we should distinguish between Rome and the Roman Empire, which are not the same thing. You see, before Rome was a massive sprawling empire, it was a republic. We recognize that things often happen differently in human history. Monarchies gradually become representational governments, but Rome decided to reverse the order. According to legend, the city was originally founded by twin brothers Romulus and Remus, all the way back in 753 BC. They were rumored to be demigods, the sons of Mars, the god of war, abandoned by a nearby king, and rescued and raised by a female wolf. As is common with brothers, especially those raised by pack animals, a fight broke out between them, either over where the city would be located or who would rule it. Yet, unlike most sibling fights, Romulus ended up killing Remus, thus achieving sole power and giving Rome his name. In yet another version, a woman named Roma, who was traveling in Aeneas's entourage along with other survivors from the sack of Troy, went to the Tiber River and absolutely refused to venture any further in their journey. To show she was serious and underscore her point to the men, she and other women burned all their ships, meaning everyone in the group ended up staying in the Rome area, whether they wanted to or not. Now, assuming that it's unlikely that two demigods raised by a wolf founded a city, and knowing that the aftermath of the Trojan War is still quite unclear, there's a good chance that these stories just may be fabricated. But they contribute to the myths and legends surrounding Rome. What we do know about the beginnings of the eventual mighty empire is that archaeological records indicate that Rome was founded in approximately 625 BC, and it likely started as a small trading center on the banks of the Tiber, and eventually developed into a city. Why and how did this happen? Well, at the time, the areas in which the town was located were called Etruria and Latium. Citizens were organized into multiple villages in the region, and they may have unified to defend themselves against an invasion of neighboring Etruscans. A competing theory suggests that the Etruscan invasion was successful and is actually what consolidated the little villages into the city known as Rome. You see, one of the problems with things that happened in 625 BC is that it's hard to find people who will give you a definitive answer about what took place back then. Regardless of what specific event brought the villagers together into a larger conglomerate, the historical record indicates a lot of upheaval and unification around 600 BC. So it's clear that by that time, Rome had moved on up in the world from its humble trading center origins. As it was setting out on its own and finding itself, much like most college students, Rome underwent several changes in its identity. Until 510 BC, Rome was firmly in its period of kings era, meaning it had established itself as a monarchy. At least 7 different rulers oversaw the city during this time. The kings came from earlier lines of royalty left by preceding civilizations, most notably Etruscan, Sabine, and the Latin lines of kings. Unlike most monarchies, the succession of the 7 kings of Rome was not hereditary. In a nod to the foundations that would eventually enable Rome's transition into a republic, the kings were elected by the Senate. After the legendary first king Romulus, the son of a wolf and the god of war, who admittedly may have been a tough act to follow, Numa Pompilius arrived on the scene. The lines of kings continued to include Tullus Hostilius, who we swear is not a Hogwarts professor but an actual Roman king, Ancus Martius, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, known as Tarquin the Elder, Servius Tullius, and finally, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, known as Tarquin the Proud. The last king, or Rex, as referred to by the Romans at the time, was apparently much less beloved than his predecessors. Historians have found evidence to indicate that his rule was widely regarded as tyrannical, with the public largely against him. Well, this came to a boiling point when Lucius Superbus's son allegedly forced himself upon a well-liked noblewoman, Lucretia. Roman residents and nobles alike reacted with rage and wanted Lucius Superbus and his son out of power. Eventually, the king was overthrown, and Rome transitioned into a republic. The word itself derives from the Latin for property of the people, res publica. If you've ever studied for the SATs, you know that it's just one of many words based on Latin roots that will keep you up at night studying for the vocabulary section. The transition to the Republic wasn't out of the blue, as some recognition of people's rights already existed. Rome's very own constitution had already been established during its first monarchical period. After becoming a republic, the city prospered, expanding its borders through military conquests, leveling up its economy and production of goods, and increasing trade with its neighbors. However, this wasn't exactly the fair and balanced representative government that you might be picturing, at least not initially. See, Rome was divided into patricians and plebeians. Patricians were members of wealthy Roman families, and they were the only ones who could hold elected office and religious office. So instead of being ruled by the people at large, the Romans were now ruled by senators and knights, meaning the upper classes held all the power. This made Rome totally different from the republics that exist today. Occasionally, if the upper classes felt it was merited, they could nominate a dictator to guide them through times of crisis, but for the most part, the rule of the patricians held for centuries. However, this wasn't solely achieved through the famed Roman Senate. Although the Senate existed at the time, it wasn't the formal lawmaking body of the Republic. The members were also appointed, not elected, an important distinction from today's legislative bodies. However, the powerful patrician members of the Senate held great sway in society and exercised it over Rome's actual lawmaking groups to get their way. The patricians looked down on the other segment of society, the plebeians, and enacted laws mostly of their own benefit. However, the plebeians, justifiably discontent with the state of affairs, struggled to gain more control within the government of the Roman Republic. From the start of the Republic in 509 BC until 494 BC, the Senate persisted as the only governing body within the state under the leadership of two consuls. That was until the plebeians organized a strike to assume some power. In a victory for both the unions and democracies everywhere, the strike worked. This led to the establishment of several legislative bodies created to give more power to the people. These were divided up as follows. Comitia Centuriata passed laws, made decisions regarding acts of war, and elected consuls, censors, and praetors. The Concilium Plebis, though it started as a ruling body specifically for the plebeians, it eventually expanded its scope of power to make decrees that applied to all people in Rome, including the patricians. The Comitia Tributa was in charge of electing minor officials and was generally in charge of the more local matters, dispensing justice by enacting fines rather than sentences. It was open to all Roman citizens, well, at least those who were free adults in possession of a penis, which was the case in most ancient societies. The two consuls in charge of this all commanded both the Roman military and oversaw the Senate, not unlike the current powers of the President of the United States. However, as opposed to the former Roman monarchs, the consuls had substantial limitations on their powers. First off, they could only serve for 1 year, leaving them limited time to accrue and thus wield power. Second, there were additional magistrate positions within the Roman Republic that also held decision-making power, thereby keeping the consuls in check. To further strengthen the Republic and the rule of law, the Romans decided to codify many new laws at the time. In 451 BC, they came up with something known as the 12 Tables, a collection of laws about politics, as well as private and public affairs. Thanks to continued expansion during Rome's existence as a republic, by 338 BC, this once small city-state was ruling the entire Italian boot-shaped peninsula. Of course, this expansion was far from linear, as they did suffer quite a few setbacks. For example, the neighboring Gauls came in and sacked Rome in 390 BC. However, the young republic managed to build again and take control of all of Italy under the leadership of Camillus, a revered military leader. Further expansion occurred during the Punic Wars, which lasted from 264 BC to 146 BC and were fought between Carthage and Rome. At the time, Carthage was an impressive and incredibly powerful city-state on the northern coast of Africa, approximately located near modern-day Tunis, Tunisia. There were 3 Punic Wars in total. After the first 2, Rome expanded to control the western Mediterranean, including Spain and the island of Sicily. They also defeated one of the greatest generals and military tacticians of all time, the legendary Hannibal. Though he continued to rule Carthage for some time after being defeated by the Romans, his financial and tax reforms enacted to pay back the massive war debt imposed by Rome made him extremely unpopular. He eventually fled east all the way to the court of Bithynia in modern-day Turkey, where he was betrayed and revealed to the Romans. To avoid capture, he poisoned himself. At the end of the Third Punic War, which took place between 149 and 146 BC, Rome finally bested its formidable foe and burned the city of Carthage to the ground. Many surviving citizens were sold into slavery, and this entire region became a Roman province. Simultaneously, Rome also expanded eastward, defeating the once mighty kingdom of Macedonia in the Macedonian Wars, 200 years after Alexander the Great had overseen his own kingdom's rapid expansion. Aside from the increased territory and economic clout that the acquisition of these provinces via military victory gave Rome, they also helped to develop Roman society and culture as a whole. As you may have noticed, if you ever walked through an Italian city, Rome took quite a lot of architectural, religious, and artistic details from the Greeks and integrated them into its society. The Greek pantheon of the gods was given new names and turned into a Roman pantheon. Roman literature got an incredible jumpstart by translating a lot of classic Greek texts into Latin. The writings of Greek philosophers influenced a lot of Roman thinking and philosophy going forward as well. Perhaps this was part of the reason for Rome's relative success. Instead of solely concentrating on burning their captured cities to the ground, though they did that sometimes too, they also acquired a lot of knowledge, art, and new perspectives from the civilizations they conquered. By this time, the Roman military had become a formidable force. The military might and territorial expansion marked Rome as the premier power in the Mediterranean, one of the ancient world's foremost centers of economic activity. Alas, it seems the Roman Republic expanded too fast for its own good. The Republic started to fall apart from within, leading to political instability and eventually civil war. Discontent led to turmoil, reform, and coup attempts, as inequality spread throughout society, thanks to wealthy landowners using their resources and power to push small farmers out of public land. The wealthy patricians also used their considerable force to exert pressure on the government, so the Senate increasingly ended up working in their favor, reversing many of the earlier gains made by plebeians in society. Disagreements among leaders led to factions forming within the government, some supporting plebeians, others patricians, and some military. Gaius Marius, a military leader, became consul in 107 BC and ruled for several terms, acting more like a warlord than a leader. This made him many enemies, and by 91 BC he faced challenges for power, including from General Sulla. Taking advantage of a Roman tradition allowing dictators to be elected occasionally, the upper class elected L. Cornelius Sulla in 82 BC. Despite being a dictator, Sulla surprisingly stepped down in 79 BC. However, the state's growing reliance on strong rulers during times of trouble marked the shift from republic to empire. A lot of Romans ended up wanting to change the status quo. Some took the path of working within the system to try to course-correct the wayward direction of the Roman Republic. This included leaders like the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, who enacted several social reforms during the period of 133 to 122 BC to help the poorest members of Roman society. Unfortunately, they were killed for their troubles, which seemingly discouraged anyone else from trying to help the poor. Others took a more violent approach to political change. In the 1st century BC, Roman Senator Lucius Catiline, along with a whole contingent of Romans who fought for the poor and downtrodden and had become incredibly discontent with the state of Roman society, laid out a plan to overthrow the government. He was about to go through with it when he was discovered by Marcus Cicero, a famous Roman orator who exposed him to the Senate. After his failed insurrection attempt, an army of the Roman Republic chased Catiline into Gaul and murdered him and most of his followers. The Republic became incredibly unstable and was embroiled in endless civil wars. This fostered a further gravitation towards strong dictatorial leaders, and eventually it all came to a head with one man, Julius Caesar. Caesar assumed power in 60 BC and had an ambitious vision for a Roman Empire. He sought to conquer huge swaths of mainland Europe, far away from the Mediterranean countries and the coasts that the Republic had controlled. He started venturing north, and by 51 BC had taken over Celtic Gaul. In addition to power and prestige, this gave him a significant amount of wealth, as he could steal Gaul's resources and people. Though Rome hadn't fully become an empire yet, as the Senate was still in existence, the senators' powers were significantly weakening. This was best exemplified when they ordered Caesar to turn back and forego his conquests of Gaul, and Caesar responded by completely ignoring them and doing what he was going to do anyway. While maintaining immense popularity with the Roman public, thanks to his successful military exploits and popular writings about travel and politics, Caesar continued to rankle other senators and former allies, creating a troubling stir in Roman politics. This was part of the reason he was eventually assassinated in 44 BC. Over 60 conspirators, many of them political officials, gathered together on March 15, now forever called the Ides of March by pretentious people, and stabbed Caesar 23 times during a meeting of the Senate. If the assassins thought the death of the headstrong Caesar would solve their problems and help them get some of their power back, they could not have been more wrong. Due to Caesar's popularity with the people, the public turned completely against the Senate, whose wealthy, out-of-touch members they hadn't exactly loved to begin with. This led to multiple civil wars until a new ruler emerged, Caesar's grandnephew and adoptive son, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, better known as Octavian for short. He took his place and ruled alongside Caesar's former friend, Mark Antony, the Roman emperor, not the Latin singing sensation, and he renamed himself Augustus Caesar, a nod to his adoptive father. When Mark Antony was killed during Rome's conquest of Egypt, Augustus remained the sole ruler. This made him the first official emperor of Rome, achieving the ambitious aims of his father. His reign was long and prosperous, lasting 41 years and representing a golden age for the empire. In fact, this period became known as Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. Before Augustus's ascension, the Roman Republic had undergone a long period of crisis, instability, and turmoil, and the people were quite frankly tired of it. So Augustus's restoration of stability within political institutions was very welcome, even at the price of establishing a sovereign ruler for life. Instead of expanding Roman territories, Augustus traveled through his lands to quell revolts and encourage peaceful coexistence with the people Rome had previously conquered. He then focused his attention on creating stability and prosperity back home. During the Pax Romana, Augustus enacted many social reforms. He wanted to restore his vision of morality in the Roman Empire and passed several laws to discourage adultery and encourage the birth of children. In fact, families with 3 or more children were frequently rewarded, especially if the kids happened to be boys. This contrasts starkly with the promiscuous, indulgent, and downright Epicurean image we have of most Roman emperors today. In some surprisingly progressive moves, Augustus also granted women citizenship and a number of rights, such as the right to inherit property and to manage their own finances. He also provided a path for slaves to gain freedom, though he made it quite clear that there would be a limit on how many slaves could actually become free. Augustus also established a regular census to ensure a fairer taxation system and win the support of even more people. This helped accurately assess the tax burden of the provinces and made collection fairer and more manageable for Roman citizens. Lastly, Augustus created the Praetorian Guard, veterans of the Roman legions and carefully screened and selected to serve as the emperor's bodyguards. Literature, architecture, and art reached an apex during Augustus's reign, and many of the most famous Roman sculptures and writings hail from this period, like the Ara Pacis Augustae, built between 13 and 9 BC. Due to all these factors and his benevolent rule, Augustus was loved by the people both during his reign and after. After his death, he was immortalized as a god, and he wouldn't be the last Roman emperor to be bestowed with this honor. Augustus's rule moved Rome into its imperial period, perhaps the time it's best known for, as after his rule, Rome conquered, well, pretty much everything it could get its hands on. The kingdom prospered and expanded, maintaining power by assimilating many of the people it conquered into its empire, but also, horrifically, making a fair amount of conquered people slaves, working for the construction and advancement of the Roman Empire. Unfortunately, not every Roman emperor was as well regarded, competent, and widely respected as Augustus. Many of you may have heard of the oft-mentioned historical figure Caligula. Known in historical circles as a crazy and violent emperor, Caligula's name eventually became used in modern society as a stand-in for anyone deemed to be extravagantly evil and unstable. Perhaps it came as no surprise to everyone, except him at least, that his life ended via assassination. Caligula had developed an unfortunate habit of sending several members of the patrician class to death on conspiracy charges, whether merited or not. This understandably significantly soured relations between the emperor and his senate. One day in late January 41 AD, Caligula was making his way to lunch through an underground passage in the Palatine when 2 tribunes of the Praetorian Guard, Cornelius Sabinius and Cassius Chaerea, murdered him. Historians doubt that they committed this act entirely by themselves. Several notable Romans, including the politicians Annius Vinicianus, Valerius Asiaticus, and commander Marcus Clemens, were implicated in the plot to assassinate Caligula. However, it seems like no one bothered to investigate all that much after the emperor was killed, a see something, say nothing policy, if you will. So one might say that Caligula's paranoid accusations of conspiracy became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Soon after his death, Claudius was proclaimed emperor in his place. However, here's where Roman history can get a little distorted and unclear and reveal the underlying political games being played as the empire expanded. For example, what if one of the Roman emperors thought that being possibly the worst human being ever to exist wasn't actually all that bad? We are, of course, talking about Nero, another man widely regarded as a stain on the imperial throne of Rome. Known in popular history for playing the fiddle while Rome burned, Nero had actually done quite a lot besides that to piss the Roman population off, according to historians of the time. He emptied the treasury, leaving the city effectively cash-strapped, murdered anyone who dared question this action of his, or really any other action of his, and generally came across like a bit of an ass. In addition, his biographer Suetonius wrote that Nero practiced every sort of obscenity, including incest, animal cruelty, and flat-out murder. When that's what your own biographer is writing about you, perhaps you've taken a wrong turn in life. Over time, historians have started to suspect that the particulars of the stories about Nero may be untrue. For example, the fiddle story is almost certainly fabricated, seeing as the fiddle wouldn't be invented for almost another millennium. But a raging fire did strike Rome at the time. In the summer of 64 AD, a huge blaze leveled 70% of the city's buildings and made half of its population homeless, as reported by Roman historian Tacitus. The shocked, desperate, and angry Roman population looked for someone to blame, and a rumor quickly spread that the already unpopular Nero had ordered the fire to be set in order to rebuild the city to his liking. His contemporaries thought that this rumor would be quite easily believed. After all, people generally aren't likely to give incestuous, homicidal, puppy-kicking monarchs the benefit of the doubt. The other problem was that while this massive conflagration was devastating the city and its people, Nero decided to make his way up to the top of the city walls, dressed in theatrical garb, and recite a poem about the destruction of Troy, while allegedly weeping with emotion as he imagined the beautiful new city that would arise from the ashes. Legends at the time have him strumming an ancient version of a guitar, known as a chitarra, while reciting his epic poem. As you can imagine, this did nothing to endear him to the people currently running for their lives from their destroyed houses, who had already put up with his BS for several years. However, there is one big problem with all of these accounts. They may be somewhat, or even mostly, false. More than that, they may actually be outright propaganda from the time. Part of the problem with relying on historical records about Rome, or really any civilization, is that we have to parse out the biases of the sources. And many modern historians or archaeologists are now questioning if Nero's reputation as one of the most evil rulers of all time is actually deserved. You see, contrary to the popular belief that Nero was disliked by the Roman population, it appears he may have actually been disliked by the elite instead. Unfortunately, Rome elites were the people who mostly shaped how history would be recorded. During his reign, which began when Nero was a very young 17 years old, he enacted tax reforms that pissed off the wealthy but made life significantly better for the lower classes. He also loved games, theater, and entertainment, perhaps why the most infamous story about him has him playing music while reciting a poem, and encouraged such activities amongst the Roman population, organizing events like chariot races. This won him fans among the public, even as it garnered disdain from his fellow wealthy Romans. He also increased the supply of food available to Rome and undertook several important public works projects. In many artworks and coinage of the time, he is depicted as an emperor well-liked by the population at large. So why would the Roman writers, who were Nero's contemporaries, make up so many vicious lies about him? Curator Thorsten Opper of the British Museum points out a simple truth. The sources need to be seen as texts with a clear agenda. Many Roman writers seem to prefer the old days of oligarchical rule in Rome and detested an emperor who seemed to favor the support and wants of the masses instead. Historians have now uncovered evidence that when the fire broke out in Rome, Nero was actually 30 miles away from the city. So not only was it unlikely he was responsible, but he definitely could not have made his way to the top of the city walls and started playing a fiddle or even a chitarra. It's not to say that Nero was a blameless angel. It's very likely he either killed his mother or forced her into ending her life, and he definitely loved partaking in some extravagant spending for himself. However, perhaps painting a depressing picture of the era, neither of these were exactly unheard of acts of monarchs at the time, as killing relatives to secure succession or favor was not all that rare. He also set Christians on fire, blaming them for starting the blaze that burned down Rome. Yet again, though, horrible abuse and mistreatment of Christians was pretty par for the course for Roman emperors overall. So while Nero has been immortalized as an ostentatious, evil, bloodthirsty, unstable, maniacal ruler, the actual problems of his reign and the reason for his eventual downfall seem to have been much more practical and grounded in reality. They also pointed to the issues that would plague the Roman Empire and eventually lead to its collapse. Nero steadily lost the support and favor of Rome's elite over time by prioritizing the Roman people while extravagantly spending tons and tons of money. Simultaneously, he was tasked from the age of 17 with overseeing and holding together a massive, sprawling empire and dealing with the unrest and revolt that ensued after an empire had enslaved several populations. In one corner of the kingdom, Nero faced a fierce revolt led by Queen Boudicca of the Celts, who completely sacked the Roman outpost of Londinium, forcing experienced Roman soldiers to flee in terror before launching a counterattack. In the other corner, the Parthian Empire, located around the region of present-day Iran, was ready to go to war. These events all happened within a few years, testing the endurance and long-term viability of the Roman Empire. More significantly, Nero also started facing dissent from his own supposed subordinates. The governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, known as Gaius Julius Vindex, with a V, unlike the popular cleaning product, rebelled against Nero's rule. He was joined by the Roman governor of Spain, Servius Sulpicius Galba, who challenged Nero for his power and position. Though Vindex and his forces lost, which led to Vindex killing himself, more and more politicians threw their support behind Galba, as did those in the Spanish provinces. When the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, who essentially functioned as Nero's head bodyguard, also declared allegiance to Galba, Nero, understandably fearing for his life, fled Rome. With almost no support from the Senate, who had just passed a vote declaring Nero an enemy of Rome, the young emperor realized that his reign, and most likely his life, was coming to an end. In an effort to avoid the humiliation of a public execution, he killed himself at age 30. Since he had no official heir, the Julio-Claudian dynasty that his great-great-grandfather Augustus had implemented ended with Nero's death. As a result, Galba took up the mantle of Roman emperor. Even at this relatively early time, the cracks of the Roman Empire were already beginning to show. Ruling over so many different peoples in far-flung territories and keeping together a massive expanse of land in an age of slow communication and travel was a daunting task, at times seemingly impossible. Couple that with dissatisfied occupied people, local Roman rulers who would sometimes decide to make grabs for power, and general political turmoil, and you have the makings of a beginning of the end. For example, the rule of Galba would be short-lived. The year after Nero's death became known as the Year of the Four Emperors, which, as you might have noticed, is a significantly higher number of monarchs than you'd expect to go through in a year. Though the period did actually last a bit longer, amounting to a little more than a year and a half, the quick changes in leadership indicated nothing particularly productive or good going on in the Roman Empire at the time. Let's zoom in on what exactly happened. The year was 69 AD. It was the worst of times, and that's pretty much it. With the endorsement of the Senate, Galba had started his victory march to Rome. Unfortunately, a word that will continue to pop up in the description of Roman emperors from here on, Galba had already acquired a reputation for greed and cruelty. After just 7 months in office, it became clear to the people of Rome that his reputation was well-deserved. He frequently functioned as a judge, jury, and executioner, sentencing noble Roman men to death due to his own unconfirmed suspicions. He would also seize Roman property on a whim and lean into very paternalistic systems in which those loyal to him were allowed to tax and punish others on the basis of political favors. Corruption flourished under Galba, and Roman citizens started to bristle at this new state of affairs. The masses tried to pressure Galba to punish 2 of his most corrupt lieutenants in a show of petty defiance and dismissal of the people's will. Reminiscent of a stubborn 4-year-old, Galba promoted them instead. Most infuriatingly and stupidly for his own preservation, Galba refused to pay the Roman legions the salary they were owed. Now, we're far from political experts, but refusing to pay your armies seems like a great way to encourage a coup. After months of ill treatment and no pay, while simultaneously seeing Galba flaunt his corruption and cruelty, the legions in Lower Germany decided that enough was enough, and they proclaimed their own general, Aulus Vitellius, emperor. In a show of solidarity with this new development, the Praetorian Guard murdered Galba in the Roman Forum on January 15th. This marks the second time that the Roman emperor's bodyguards presented more of a threat than protection for the ruler of Rome. It would be far from the last. Galba's body was left in the street after his assassination. To understand how disrespected he was by the time of his death, he lay there for a while until a soldier walked by, recognized who it was, and beheaded him to deliver his head to Marcus Salvius Otho. Who, you might ask, is Marcus Salvius Otho? And why didn't any Romans have simpler names? Though we're unsure of the answer to the second question, the first answer is the soon-to-be second emperor of the Year of Four Emperors. If you were paying attention earlier in the video, you might have recognized a small problem with Otho becoming the second emperor of the year. Generous Aulus Vitellius of the Germans had already been proclaimed emperor by his legions. And as the Roman Empire, like most empires, functions under Highlander rules, there could only be one. So, what's Otho's story? Otho had started as a supporter of Galba but gradually distanced himself as he saw Galba's support wane and his behavior worsen. After Galba was killed, the Senate proclaimed Otho emperor. Seemingly a relatively peaceful and good man, Otho tried to reason with Vitellius and his legions as they marched toward Rome and agreed on a peace settlement. However, Vitellius had no interest in peace, nor did he give up his bid for the title of emperor. Otho realized that he'd have to meet the incoming general with military force and sent his troops out to meet those from Lower Germania. Though his legions initially won some victories, they suffered a brutal defeat at the Battle of Bedriacum. Historical accounts may not be totally reliable, as you've seen so far, but Roman historian and senator Cassius Dio wrote that 40,000 Romans died on the battlefield that day. No matter what the exact number was, it is clear that the Roman losses were devastating. At the time, Otho himself was in Brixellum. A messenger from the bloody battle flew in at top speed to deliver the news, which was so shocking that Otho and his companions didn't even believe it at first. The messenger, clearly fiercely committed to getting this important news across to the temporary emperor, threw himself on his sword to emphasize the seriousness of what he was saying. I don't know, but we're sure there are better ways to emphasize your points in an argument, but people during the Roman Empire seem to frequently resort to self-destruction as a matter of first resort. Now, convinced of the seriousness of his losses, Otho decided he would end his resistance then and there. Though historians believe he might have actually won if he had continued fighting Vitellius's legions, it was clear that Otho thought the cost would be too great. Supposedly, he stated that he would no longer endanger the lives of such brave men who had deserved so well. And then, you guessed it, he killed himself. His loyal soldiers plunged into despair, considering Otho one of the bravest men that they had ever met and an incomparable emperor. It's sad to say that in total, Otho's rule lasted only 3 months, a real shame since, if given the chance, he would have made a pretty empathetic and perhaps great emperor. However, that was not to be. Finally, Vitellius was on the scene, and the Senate, eager to align themselves with whoever had the biggest army and was banging down their door, officially endorsed him as the newest emperor of Rome. How would he do? Well, pretty terribly. Unfortunately, before he even got to the city, Vitellius started acting like a greedy warlord instead of one of the leaders of the greatest empires the world had ever known at the time. He gave his troops free rein to intimidate and harass the locals, ask for, but more accurately plunder everything they wanted from villages that they passed through in the countryside of Gaul, and generally acted like a narcissistic despot. Even his pirate-like soldiers shuddered at Vitellius's actions during the infamous Battle of Bedriacum. They viewed the general's absolute slaughter of thousands of Roman troops as unnecessary and inhumane. Vitellius, on the other hand, apparently had no problem with the endless rotting corpses strewn before him on the battlefield. He was said to exclaim, "The odor of a dead enemy was sweet, and that of a fellow citizen sweeter still." You may recognize those words as the words of a sociopath. Soon enough, Vitellius made it clear that he had no respect for Roman rule or tradition. He declared himself above it all, gave himself supreme power, and behaved in a completely tyrannical way with frequent and pointless executions. Unfortunately, as long as he kept his legion's loyalty, he remained in power. Fortunately for Roman citizens who wished to remain alive and unexecuted, he only managed to do this for 8 months. Soon enough, tired of Vitellius's cruel excesses, another Roman legion commander decided to challenge him for the throne. Titus Flavius Vespasianus, better known as Vespasian, was leading Roman legions in Judea to suppress a Jewish revolt, while Vitellius was losing supporters left and right. Vespasian's legions and those of Syria and Alexandria declared him emperor and swore to fight for him. More legions, including Moesia, Pannonia, Illyricum, and Danube, soon followed. The combination of all those different Roman troops amounted to a formidable force, and Vespasian ended up sailing back to Rome with a massive army behind him. The legions under Vespasian were led by Antonius Primus. They easily crossed and took over northern Italy before they encountered Vitellius's legions in October. Perhaps fittingly, the fight once again took place at Bedriacum, making it the second Battle of Bedriacum. Men on both sides fought through the day and night, resulting in many losses. As the story goes, a small, seemingly ridiculous understanding ended up guaranteeing victory for Vespasian's forces. One of the legions under Primus had come from Syria, where after years on the ground, the men had picked up some local customs. One of them was saluting the sun at dawn. After fiercely battling through a long and bloody night, and perhaps not with the clearest of minds, Vitellius's forces saw this salute and concluded that Primus's men were in fact saluting incoming reinforcements. Exhausted, badly injured, in a state of disrepair, they fled the battle, with Vespasian's troops pursuing them all the way to Rome. Even after Primus's and Vespasian's troops entered the city in December, Vitellius's legion still tried to mount a last-ditch effort. They trapped the incoming men in the winding streets of the Roman capital and threw objects, including tiles from the surrounding rooftops, to kill them. Though many men died as a result of the violence within the city walls, 50,000 according to Cassius Dio, who was apparently spending that particular year as Rome's unofficial body counter, in the end, resistance was futile. Realizing that his time had come, Vitellius tried to escape the city disguised in rags, but Vespasian's men recognized and captured him immediately. They dragged him along the sacred way and displayed him in a show of public humiliation at the Forum, where a crowd hurled abuse at him. The legions then tortured him on the stairs of wailing, which is a thing that apparently needed to exist at the time, and after dragging him through the streets of Rome yet again, this time with a hook instead of a noose like the first time, for a bit of variety, they threw him into the river, but not before severing his head, which they then paraded through the city. We cannot emphasize enough how much the Romans really hated Vitellius, and how becoming a Roman emperor was apparently becoming more of a life shortener than smoking Marlboro Reds. On December 22, 69 AD, the Senate finally declared Vespasian emperor. This would signify the end of a protracted period of Roman turmoil and the beginning of a new, more powerful and prosperous era of imperial Rome known as the Flavian dynasty. Under Vespasian's rule, the Colosseum was constructed, unaware as of yet of the throngs of tourists that would one day stampede through its walls, shouting, "Are you not entertained?" at their exhausted families. Vespasian was an intelligent ruler and a good politician, making sure to restore not only the rule of law that Vitellius had completely disregarded, but also to take care of both the people of Rome and its elite class. He fully restored the power of the Senate and enacted several reforms focused on public welfare. As well regarded as the Flavian dynasty was, the year of 4 emperors troubled many Romans. It reminded them that despite the golden age Augustus had presided over as the first emperor of Rome, there was still a fundamental problem with empires and monarchies, namely, that the welfare and safety of the population often depended on the mental stability and the character of whoever's in charge. And if you're dealt a bad hand, that's it for life, or until assassination. Augustus had managed to claim and consolidate power thanks to the internal failures of the Roman Republic, and he had held on to it because of his shrewd political moves and the care he took of his people. Subsequent emperors had already started to disappoint the Roman public, and more upheavals would soon come. However, for the time being, as long as Rome continued to expand and conquer new lands, the empire's star was still rising. The Roman legions were a big reason for the Roman expansion and overall success. Known for their incredible discipline, the armies of the Roman Republic moved away from the classic formation of their neighboring civilization, the Greek phalanx. The phalanx proved unwieldy for battle, due to the landscape of most of central Italy, consisting of endless hills and valleys. Instead, the Roman legions were composed of relatively small infantry units, known as maniples. Each maniple had 120 men in 12 files and 10 ranks. At times of battle, maniples were arranged in 3 lines of 10 in a checkerboard pattern. That way, the lines were flexible, and the first line could fall back into a defensive formation with the second line if required, or alternatively, the second line could reinforce the first. Gradually, a new, larger unit known as a cohort replaced the maniple. Each had around 360 men, and around the time of Julius Caesar, every legion would have around 10 cohorts, 4 in the front, followed by 2 lines of 3 cohorts each. While this added up to 3,600 men, this only included the heavily armed infantry. The cohorts usually had supporting forces of light infantry and cavalry, bringing the total number of each legion up to around 6,000 men. To put a visual on these large numbers, when 7 legions would go into battle, a not uncommon occurrence, there would be about 25,000 heavily armed infantry stretched out over 1.5 miles. That's a length of just over 26 football fields. An interesting change occurred when the tide of war shifted, and Rome eventually found itself on the defensive side, protecting against invasions rather than invading others to conquer their land. Cohorts were increased to 500 to 600 men each, meaning each legion now had around 5,000 to 6,000 heavily armed infantry troops alone, with cavalry and light infantry composed of archers, slingers, and javelin men functioning as a backup. When the Roman legions started encountering barbarian armies mounted on horseback, they increased the proportion of cavalry to counter these new mounted troops. Thus, cavalry went from 1/7 of an average legion to 1/4. In the 4th century AD, the Romans instituted catapults and ballistas as part of their legions to enhance their defensive capabilities. In addition to the Roman army's unique formation and strict discipline, the legion's weapons provided another big advantage in battle. The pilum and gladius were two of the most popular weapons for infantry soldiers at the time. The pilum was a javelin measuring 7 feet or just over 2 meters, and the gladius was a type of sword about 20 inches or 50 centimeters long. These weapons enabled Roman soldiers to excel in hand-to-hand combat and fighting at a distance with javelins. In addition, the Romans had strong defensive equipment that helped protect them in battles. Items like metal helmets, shields, and cuirasses, or breastplates and backplates fastened together and meant to protect the torso, reduced the amount of damage Roman soldiers took to the head and body. Roman technological advancements helped not only on the battlefield but also in the development of civilization itself. One of the major contributions of the Roman Empire to the world, for example, was the rapid development of engineering practices. Even today, ancient Roman aquifers still survive in parts of Italy and the former Roman territories. The Romans built sophisticated underground sewage systems, enabling not only a primitive form of plumbing to exist, but also improving their city's general hygiene and cleanliness, as waste flowed underground instead of being left on the streets. Part of what enabled Roman engineering marvels was the development of cement and concrete as building materials. The combination of such materials created structures that have stood the test of time, which is part of the reason for the prevalence of Roman ruins throughout the modern world today. By far one of the best achievements of the Romans, and one that helped not only their military expeditions, but also the impressive development of their trade routes, was the Roman road system. Two of the most famous roads, Via Appia and Via Egnatia, enabled the exchange between Rome and Brindisi and Rome and Constantinople, present-day Istanbul, not Constantinople. You can still find remnants of the Appian Way in Italy today, and Ignatia Odos, translated from Greek as Ignatia Street, still runs through the major Greek city of Thessaloniki. As the Roman Empire grew, this extensive road system helped keep the disparate parts of this grand civilization connected. This helped to maintain the precariously large Roman Empire, as did the taxation system. You see, when Rome conquered a new territory, a lot of the residents of the region would become Roman citizens and would be taxed as such. In addition to newly obtained local resources, this increase in the tax base helped grow the empire's wealth. At its peak in 117 AD, the Roman Empire encompassed a lot of the northern African coast, Asia Minor, and most of Europe. This meant that the lands of Rome stretched from the Atlantic coast to the Euphrates River, with the northernmost borders of the empire found in Britain. However, the seeds of Rome's undoing had already been planted. The precariousness of the imperial throne, the reliance on imperial conquests for wealth and forced labor, the challenges associated with ruling such a massive area, as well as the class divisions that had pestered Rome since the beginning. All of these factors started to combine into a toxic mix. With the Roman Empire stretched so wide, it was also stretched incredibly thinly. No matter how well the Roman road systems worked, there were no 747s in operation or Zoom meetings to enable oversight of such a large empire. Once Roman expansion stopped, in some cases because they had literally reached the end of a landmass, two major problems materialized. First off, Rome had always relied on its militaristic expansion to enslave a portion of the newly conquered population, and they used forced labor to maintain infrastructure, build the empire's engineering marvels, produce food, and just generally keep the system running. Once the empire became overextended and new conquests ground to a halt, the incoming supply of enslaved labor was halted as well. Though this was undoubtedly good news to all the neighbors of the Roman Empire who wished to remain free, i.e. everyone, it started an era of declining labor force in Rome. Second, the acquisition of new territories and a new tax base from the conquered people, who became citizens instead of slaves, continuously imparted wealth into the Roman Empire. Without the acquisition of new wealth, the Roman economy started to stagnate. Even worse, the heavily armed, formidable Roman legions still had to be funded during the period, as even though they weren't actively fighting to conquer neighboring lands, they still had their hands full, defending the empire from revolts and neighboring invasions. That meant that the army required increasing resources in its valiant attempt to hold Rome's borders together while avoiding acquiring more wealth and land. Defensive spending coupled with no economic growth created a further problem Funds had to be diverted away from the empire's other needs and into the military. Rome's military overspending in its waning years were not only to soldiers but also to engineering feats, like Hadrian's Wall in Great Britain, meant to keep potential invaders away and alleviate some of the pressure on Roman soldiers to defend the border. However, this meant that maintaining the complex, advanced infrastructure built within Rome became a secondary goal, and the empire's irrigation, sewage, and road system started to slide into disrepair. This decreased both the quality of life for the average Roman citizen as well as their trust and pride in the emperor and the Senate, as it was clear that citizens' needs were not being prioritized. Some scholars argued that the Roman emperors of the time period had to extract more and more taxes from the population to fund the army. This actually led to fewer people being able to pay the taxes, eventually wiping out the middle class, while the rich moved their homes outside of the city and sought to evade taxes. There's significant debate about how much this actually affected the Roman economy of the time. However, much evidence suggests that coin hoarding became common throughout the empire in this era to help avoid taxes. Meanwhile, a political system that had started to rely on ascension via homicide was also becoming problematic. As the empire grew, becoming emperor of Rome almost guaranteed a shortened lifespan. The crisis of the 3rd century started in 235 AD, and it was exactly as fun as it sounds for everyone involved. The emperor at the time, Severus Alexander, had ascended to the throne at 14 years old. Despite that, his reign had been peaceful and a prosperous one overall. However, he was very ill-suited for battle. Unfortunately for him, Rome's neighbors were starting to poke at the empire's borders. Starting in 231 AD, the Sasanian Empire invaded Roman lands, followed by numerous invasions by the neighboring Germanic tribes between 234 and 235 AD. As empathetic and conscientious a ruler as Severus was, he was an incredibly inept general. His troops started to resent him, and their military discipline fell apart. Eventually, in March of 235 AD, Maximinus Thrax, along with his legion, mutinied and assassinated Severus Alexander. Naturally, according to the rules of the time, that made him the next emperor. On a side note, we don't recommend this method for acquiring any job of your dreams. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Maximinus would not go on to have a long and prosperous reign. Instead, his ascension started the crisis, almost 50 years of utter anarchy, in which military leaders fought and killed each other to ascend to the throne. Rulers died under mysterious circumstances. Disease, revolts, and fires plagued the land. Persecution of Christians also ran rampant during this time. More than 25 men took power during this period, almost all of them dying by assassination. Worse yet, the people tasked with protecting the Roman emperors, the Praetorian Guard, were actually the murderers most of the time. Without stable and peaceful leadership, corruption ran rampant throughout Rome, including in its Senate, and civic participation and pride failed miserably. Things got so bad that one time the Praetorian Guard assassinated a Roman emperor and named the next one based on the highest bidder. Some rulers' reigns only lasted for a few days or weeks, though the exact time span of some of the reigns is uncertain. It appears the record for the shortest reign goes to the father and son team of Gordian I and Gordian II. The pair revolted against Maximinus in April of 238 AD and were recognized by the Senate. A whole 22 days later, Gordian II was killed by legions loyal to Maximinus, and Gordian I, who was the ripe old age of 80, killed himself as soon as he heard the news. 1 month later, Maximinus himself was killed by his own men, so defeating the Gordians ended up being a bit of a Pyrrhic victory after all. The era of imperial crisis ended in 285 AD and was followed by the Tetrarchy. Diocletian, the emperor of the time, initiated a split of the Roman Empire into the western and eastern sections. Splitting the empire was an attempt to make this large bureaucracy more manageable, with Diocletian appointing junior rulers, resulting in 4 separate rulers functioning all at once, which is what gave this period the name Tetrarchy. 2 Caesars ruled the Roman Empire under 2 Augusti because Romans liked using names of former rulers as formal titles in order to confuse future history students. Diocletian theoretically co-ruled with Maximian, a military colleague he appointed Caesar in 285 AD, though in practice, Maximian always functioned as a subordinate. Perhaps since he had come from humble origins, he felt he owed Diocletian a favor and should follow his rules. Then in 305 AD, Diocletian did something quite rare for a Roman Empire. He let go of the throne without being assassinated or just dying. Feeling increasingly weak and overwhelmed, he gave an emotional speech in which he explained that the empire should be ruled by someone stronger than him. As Maximian worked for Diocletian for all intents and purposes, this meant he had to abdicate as well. However, instead of a peaceful transfer of power ushering in a new era of prosperity, it instead plunged the empire into civil war. One man known as the future Emperor Constantine finally emerged victorious in 312 AD. He killed his co-emperor Maxentius at Milvian Bridge, and once again, the Western Roman Empire had one and only one ruler. Wanting to lead the entire Roman Empire once more, Constantine also defeated the Eastern ruler and ended up ruling over a united empire. However, he acknowledged the slight separation that had formed between the empire's two geographical segments by establishing the capital of Constantinople, named after himself, in the east. Constantine is also famous for being the first Roman emperor to establish Christianity as the empire's official religion, as opposed to former rulers who had persecuted this, at the time, new wave religion. Even Diocletian and Maximian had ordered the closing of churches and the burning of Christian scriptures just a few years before. Constantine ruled until 337 AD, when he died of natural causes. After his death, the running of the empire was handed over to his three sons, the unimaginatively named Constantine II, Constans I, and Constantius II. Once again, power struggles emerged with the three rulers at the helm. Constantine II and Constans I fought a vicious war for power, which resulted in Constantine II's death. Constans I's victory was short-lived, as the Roman legion soon declared a military man named Magnentius as the emperor, who promptly killed Constans I. Just 3.5 years later, Magnentius killed himself after losing a battle, thus allowing Constantius II, the sole remaining son of Constantine, who had been ruler of the East during Magnentius's rise to power in Rome, to take full control. Then a fever in 361 AD came and wiped Constantius II out as well. The next man to ascend to the throne, Julian, was a cousin of Constantius II. He ruled for only 2 short years before succumbing to injuries during a battle against Persia. However, he remains known to this day for being the last emperor to rule over a pagan Rome, as he decided to reverse the empire's stance on Christianity. After Julian's death in 363 AD came the Valentinian dynasty, marked by power struggles, usurpations, assassinations, and overall turmoil. Eventually, Theodosius I, who had started in 379 AD as an emperor of the East, ruled over a united Roman Empire once again after the death of Valentinian II, the Western ruler, in 392 AD. However, this united Roman Empire would be short-lived. Theodosius I died just a few years later in 395 AD. This marked the final split of Rome between Theodosius's sons, Arcadius and Honorius, after the area had been split and resplit several times over the last few decades. The final division lay between the East, ruled by Arcadius, which would become the Byzantine Empire, and the West, ruled by Honorius, which would become, well, nothing at all pretty soon after. The Eastern Roman Empire continued to thrive while the West quickly crumbled. In fact, the prosperity of the East may have hastened the collapse of the West. Though the two smaller areas could theoretically be managed more easily now, they also had to coordinate military funding and resource allocation, which they failed to do spectacularly. When outside forces like the Germanic tribes threatened the empire, the two sides could not cooperate well enough to swiftly take action. Over time, the Greek-speaking Byzantine Empire grew in wealth, while the Latin-speaking West experienced an exacerbated economic crisis. Constantine and subsequent emperors of the East had made sure to fortify the city well and keep legions stationed around its wall. The Byzantine Empire's wealth helped shore up those fortifications. Nearby invaders, seeing Constantinople's power and strength as opposed to Rome's weakness and ruin, became more likely to attack the West for an easier victory. In contrast, the Eternal City, the place that had once stood as a symbol of the mighty Roman Empire's power, was falling apart internally and physically as its infrastructure crumbled. But what happened to the formidable and well-armed Roman legions? How could the empire have crumbled so quickly while these impressive soldiers were out there defending Roman lands? Well, in later years, such as during the reigns of the emperors Diocletian and Constantine, the increasing challenge of keeping the Roman legions well-funded and able to fend off revolts and outside attacks created the need for mercenaries. Emperors would recruit soldiers from various neighboring factions, including the Germanic Goths. A strange arrangement, as they had frequently fought with them in the past. However, it was clear that desperate times called for desperate measures. The Goths fought well enough, but the problem was they didn't have any particular reason to be loyal to Rome. They were, as most mercenaries, just in it for the money. In fact, some of them became very resentful toward the Roman Empire, and for justifiable reasons. When one of the biggest invasions to date occurred in the area, the rampage of the Huns across northern Europe in the late 4th century, many Germanic tribes fled south into the Roman Empire. Otherwise, they faced potential slaughter by the Huns. On the other hand, they ended up dealing with harassment and flat-out abuse in Rome, a real between-a-rock-and-a-hard-place situation. Though tribes like the Visigoths were allowed to cross the Danube into Roman territory, the Romans made it clear that they would barely be tolerated within the empire's borders. Historian Ammianus Marcellinus notes that while the Visigoths were starving, Roman officials would give them dog meat, but sometimes only in exchange for forcing the Visigoth children into slavery. The Roman treatment of the Goths became too cruel to bear, and eventually a fierce revolt occurred, ending in the obliteration of a Roman army in the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, and the murder of Eastern Emperor Valens. The fact that Goths were also serving in the Roman army at this point probably did not help the Roman legions win any victories, as it's unlikely they would have stayed to fight against their brothers. Genuinely perplexed as to why the people they had fed dog meat to in exchange for making their children slaves held such resentment against them, the Romans scrambled to negotiate a truce. However, by 410 the Goths were over any idea of peace, and the Goth king Alaric, a great name for a no doubt terrible band, had had enough. He marched west and sacked the city of Rome with the help of several Goth soldiers who had spent time serving in the Roman army and learning all their techniques and formations. Though the empire would hold on for a little bit longer, it was nothing more than a dying gasp. Neighboring Goths, the European tribes, not the Marilyn Manson fans, repeatedly attacked the empire until one of the tribes, the Vandals, burned it all to the ground in 455 AD. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire had crumbled. Perhaps fittingly, the very last emperor of Rome was named Romulus, an echo of the very first emperor of Rome. After being defeated by a Germanic general named Odoacer, he was thrown out but allowed to live out the rest of his life in exile, going out like the rest of the Western Roman Empire, not with a bang but a whimper. Did you know most of these details about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire? If not, what surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And in the meantime, watch What Caused the Roman Empire to Collapse, or this one instead.